It's been 2 months, and I still can't get that night out of my head. The memories creep up on me at the most random times, when I'm washing dishes, folding laundry, or trying to fall asleep. They choke me, stealing my breath, and leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about myself. But I need to get this out. Maybe writing it down will help me leave it behind in 2024, where it belongs. I can't keep replaying it, wondering how I let it happen. It started on a Saturday, right after a big fight with my boyfriend. It was not just a quarrel, it was a battle. The one where you say things you can't take back. He yelled, I yelled louder. By the end of it, I was grabbing my keys, slamming the door, and swearing I'd never forgive him. Even as I stormed out, though, I knew I'd be back. We always found our way back to each other, even when we probably shouldn't. I ended up at my mom's house, curled up on the couch like a teenager all over again. She tried to console me, saying all the things moms are supposed to say. He's not worth it, you deserve better, time heals everything, but none of it helped. By the time I'd cried myself dry, the clock read 6 p.m. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, but the world felt gray. My mom was in the kitchen, clattering dishes, and I was alone with my thoughts. That's when I remembered the flyer. A few weeks ago, I received a postcard swing night. Come explore your wild side. At the time, I rolled my eyes and threw it in my bag. I was in a serious relationship. I didn't need this kind of exploration. And now I was lonely, angry, and desperate to feel something other than heartbreak. To be honest, I've been to such parties more than once before our relationship. Before I could overthink it, I grabbed the flyer and my keys. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not my mom, not my friends. Definitely not him. I wasn't even sure I wanted to go. I just needed an escape. The drive was a blur. The venue was tucked away in an industrial area, anonymous and unassuming. My heels clicked on the pavement as I approached the door, each step echoing like a heartbeat. I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration, my mind racing with what was I doing here? Would anyone even notice me? But the moment I stepped inside, the world shifted. The room was dimly lit, with soft music thrumming in the background. It smelled faintly of perfume and something else, something raw and electric. There were people everywhere, laughing, drinking, lounging on plush couches. The energy was thick, almost tangible, and I felt it settle over me like a second skin. I didn't speak to anyone at first. I just threw off my clothes, found a place, it was a sofa, and allowed myself to disappear into the crowd. A man offered me a drink, his smile easy and practiced. I shook my head, avoiding his gaze. I wasn't here to make friends. As the minutes ticked by, I started to relax. The tension in my shoulders eased, and I leaned back against the cushions, closing my eyes. The sounds of the room faded into a comforting hum. I let myself drift, letting the music and laughter wash over me. I didn't think about him. I wasn't thinking about a quarrel. I just existed. The couch beneath me was soft, almost too soft, like it was trying to swallow me whole. My breathing slowed, my limbs felt heavy, and the room around me faded into a haze of muted laughter and whispers. I wasn't sure if my eyes were open or closed anymore. Then I felt it. A touch, light as a feather, brushing along my arm. It wasn't intrusive or demanding. It was curious. The fingers moved in slow circles, tracing patterns on my skin that sent shivers cascading down my spine. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't want to. I didn't want to know who was there, who was touching me. I just wanted to sink into the sensation, let it drown me. More hands followed, tentative at first, then firmer, more confident. They moved like they were exploring a map, charting every inch of me with deliberate care. My breath hitched as one hand slid across my collarbone, down my arm, while another brushed the curve of my hip. It was overwhelming, but in a way that made me crave more. I didn't care who they belonged to. In that moment, I wasn't myself. I wasn't the girl who screamed at her boyfriend in a fit of rage, the girl who ran away and cried to her mother. I was someone else entirely, someone free. The voices around me began to fade, replaced by soft, rhythmic murmurs. I felt the weight of bodies near mine, the heat of their presence pooling around me like a cocoon. Hands intertwined with mine, coaxing me to relax further, and I let them. I let everything go. My skin felt alive under their touch, every nerve ending firing like fireworks in the night. Fingers traced my jawline, tilted my chin, and I felt the faintest brush of lips against my neck. The sensation was maddening, a mixture of heat and tenderness that sent my thoughts spiraling. I still didn't open my eyes. The textures became vivid, the silk of a scarf grazing my wrist, the warmth of someone's breath against my ear, the firm yet gentle pressure of hands against my back. It was all a dance, slow and languid like the ebb and flow of the ocean. I sank deeper, letting the waves carry me. My heart pounded in my chest, loud and wild, yet somehow in sync with the rhythm of the room. And then the touch changed. Something very soft, unfamiliar, was pressing on my thigh. It wasn't hard or insistent as it can be, but it was different enough to bring me back to awareness. My mind was screaming at me to pay attention, to look, but my body was lost in the sensations. I kept getting high. I couldn't bring myself to stop. Not yet. I finally opened my eyes to an unusual stage smell and pace. The dim lighting made it hard to focus, but the world around me came back with amazing clarity. The first thing I saw was him, older, his weathered face lined with deep creases and a crooked grin that made my stomach churn. He was holding a cane, leaning heavily on it as he hovered close. His eyes glinted with something I couldn't place, something that made me feel small and exposed. My breath caught in my throat as reality crashed in. The hands that had felt so intoxicating just moments ago were now foreign, alien. I pushed myself upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What the hell?" I muttered, the words sticking in my throat. His grin widened as if he hadn't heard me, or didn't care. That's when I noticed the sticky yellow streaks on my skin, the cloying smell that made my stomach turn. It wasn't just him. It was all of them, all the strangers I hadn't dared to look at until now. I stumbled off the couch, grabbing my clothes and clutching them to my chest. My legs felt like jelly as I ran for the bathroom, the laughter and murmurs following me like a ghost. Under the harsh light of the bathroom mirror, I saw myself clearly for the first time that night. My mascara was smudged, my cheeks flushed, and my eyes wide with panic. I scrubbed at my skin furiously, the water scalding as I tried to wash away everything, the touches, the smells, the shame. But it didn't work. No matter how hard I scrubbed, I couldn't get clean. Now, as I write this, my hands are trembling. I still don't know how I let it go so far. How I let myself sink so deeply into that world, so detached from reality. But I do know this. That moment, the one where I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself, it's the moment that haunts me the most. And it was only the beginning. Even now, 2 months later, the memory of that night feels like a scar that won't heal. Some days it's a dull ache, and other days it's a sharp, unbearable sting. But always it's there, reminding me of who I became in those hours. After the shower, I went home to my mom's house. The drive was a blur. I don't remember parking, walking up the stairs, or the way I collapsed into bed. All I knew was the heaviness in my chest and the sickening sense of something irreversible having happened. My skin still felt touched, no matter how much soap I'd used, no matter how raw I'd scrubbed. I told myself I'd forget, that it was just one night. But the mind has a cruel way of holding on to things, replaying them when you least expect it. The first few days were manageable. I distracted myself with the mundane. Laundry, TV, scrolling endlessly on my phone. But the nights were unbearable. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, and every time I closed my eyes I was back there. I could feel the soft touch of hands on my skin, the warmth of bodies that were too close, the sticky residue of something I didn't want to name, and worst of all my boyfriend. And even worse, this old man. His voice haunted me the most, that low rasp of satisfaction echoing in my ears. "Oh yes," he'd said, and I couldn't escape it. It clung to me, a phantom that wouldn't let go. A week later the nausea started. At first, I thought it was the stress, the sleepless nights catching up to me. But then came the dizziness, the way food turned my stomach. It wasn't long before I couldn't keep anything down. By the 8th day, I couldn't take it anymore. My body felt like it was shutting down, betraying me in ways I didn't understand. Called for an ambulance. The ride to the hospital was a haze of fluorescent lights and clipped voices. A nurse held my hand as I tried to explain what was wrong, my words slurring as exhaustion pulled me under. I remember her face softening, a pitying look that made me feel smaller than I already did. When the doctor returned with the results, his face was unreadable. "You're pregnant," he said, his voice steady, clinical. Pregnant. The word hit me like a freight train. I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh, to say it was a mistake. But he didn't. He just sat there watching me crumble. "Is there someone we can call?" he asked gently. "The father, perhaps." The father. I wanted to laugh, to cry, to scream. Instead, I just shook my head, numb and hollow. As I lay in the hospital bed, the memories I'd tried so hard to bury began to surface with relentless clarity. I remembered the warmth I'd felt that night, the strange softness that had caught my attention even in my haze. And I remembered the moment I'd opened my eyes. The cane, the grin, the way he had looked at me like I was something to conquer. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just a bad memory. It wasn't just a mistake I could chalk up to a moment of weakness. It was him. And now it was this. When I called my boyfriend, yes, I still called him that despite everything, I was desperate for comfort. For some small piece of my old life to ground me. I told him everything in a rush, my words tumbling over each other as I sobbed into the phone. But his response wasn't what I'd hoped for. He accused me, his voice sharp with anger and betrayal. "It's not mine," he spat. "You think I don't know you've been out doing whatever the hell you've been doing? You think I'm stupid?" I tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. He hung up, leaving me alone in the sterile hospital room, the beep of the monitors the only sound. The days that followed were a blur of tears and silence. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. All I could do was replay that night over and over, dissecting every detail. I tried to tell myself it wasn't real, that it couldn't be. But deep down I knew the truth. I hadn't gone looking for this. But it had found me anyway. And now I had to live with it. The days turned into weeks, and I found myself spiraling further into despair. Every time I looked at myself in the mirror, all I could see was him. His hands, his voice, his awful grin. It wasn't just my body that felt tainted. It was my mind, my soul. I was drowning in a sea of shame and regret, and no one could pull me out. Had to know. I had to find him. Started with the swing parties. I went back not for the reasons I had before, but because I needed answers. I told myself it was about closure, about confronting the man who had ruined me. But deep down I think I hoped he wouldn't be there. That it had all been some twisted nightmare. The first few nights were fruitless. The venues were different, the faces unfamiliar. People laughed, flirted, and carried on as if nothing had changed. I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of a world I no longer belonged to. Every man I saw became him for a moment, until they weren't. Then one night, a woman with piercing blue eyes and a cigarette dangling from her lips approached me. "You look lost," she said, her voice low and raspy. I didn't answer, just stared at her, wondering if she knew. They all knew. "Looking for someone?" she asked, tilting her head. "Yes," I said finally. My voice cracked, and I hated myself for it. She smirked, taking a drag from her cigarette. "Aren't we all?" Weeks turned into a month, and still I found nothing. I didn't even know his name, his story, or where he'd come from. He was a phantom, slipping through my fingers every time I got close. The weight of it all was crushing me, the not knowing, the endless searching. Then, one cold November night I found him. It was a dingy bar on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the lights flicker and the floor sticks to your shoes. I'd gone there on a whim, desperate for a change of scenery, desperate for anything. And there he was. He sat hunched over the bar, a glass of something dark in his gnarled hand. His cane leaned against the counter, a cruel reminder of the night that had shattered my world. My stomach churned and my palms grew slick with sweat. I stood frozen in the doorway, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to run, to flee and pretend I hadn't seen him. But another part, the part that had spent sleepless nights replaying his voice in my head, pushed me forward. "Do you remember me?" I asked, my voice trembling as I stood behind him. He turned slowly, his face lined with confusion at first, then recognition, and then denial. "I don't know you," he said, his words slurred. "You do," I shot back, my voice growing steadier. "You were there that night." "You," my voice cracked, and I swallowed hard. "You're the father." He laughed, a wet, rasping sound that made my skin crawl. "You're crazy," he said, shaking his head. "I don't even know what you're talking about." But his eyes told a different story. They flickered with something, fear maybe or guilt. I wasn't sure. "We'll see," I said, my voice cold. "We'll do a test. And when it comes back, you'll know exactly who I am." The results didn't take long. Few weeks later I had my answer. He was the father. I confronted him again, shoving the paper into his hands. He didn't even bother looking at it. He just laughed, bitter and hollow. "So what?" he said. "What do you want from me?" "I've got nothing to give you." And he was right. He was a broken man, living off scraps in a world that had forgotten him. There was nothing I could take from him, no justice to be found. The truth crushed me. Now, as I write this, I can still see his face, the lines of age, the sneer that never quite left his lips. He's in a hospital now, his heart failing under the weight of his own sins. I thought knowing would bring me peace, but it hasn't. Because this isn't about him. It's about me. It's December 28th now, 2 months since that night, and I'm still trying to pick up the pieces of the life I shattered. I thought finding him would give me closure, but all it did was deepen the wound. He's not the answer. He's just a man, a broken, cruel man who gave me nothing but pain. But this child is mine. At first, I hated the idea of becoming a mother. The thought of carrying a piece of that night with me for the rest of my life was unbearable. But as the weeks passed, something shifted. Late at night, when the world was quiet, I'd find myself speaking to the life growing inside me, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. "You'll be loved," I'd say. "I'll give you everything I never had. I'll be enough for you." And somehow those words began to feel real. This child is not a mistake. They're not a punishment. They're a chance, my chance, to turn something awful into something beautiful. I've decided to keep them, to love them, and to build a life that's brighter than the darkness I've carried. I'll never forget that night. It's a part of me now, etched into my skin and my soul. But it doesn't define me. What defines me is what I choose to do next. Choose love. Now I want to hear your words, your support, your thoughts. What would you do in my place?